I wanted to talk about this piece that Ivo Dodler wrote for theatlantic.com. It's titled, Let Ukraine In. And Ivo asked the question, what happens to Ukraine once the fighting slows or the war stops? And says that, you know, to be really truly free and independent and secure, Ukraine is going to not only have to be a member of the European Union, but also of NATO. And, you know, Putin invaded on February 24th. And ever since then, a whole bunch of European nations are going, what? And in fact, the other news story that I was going to share with you, I'll do it right now, that is being reported in the New York Times this morning, is that Sweden and Finland, the two Scandinavian holdouts with regard to NATO, have both agreed now that they're going to submit their applications for NATO membership at the same time. So strength in numbers. It's getting interesting. But he is proposing that first of all, the EU has already basically said, we'll speed things up for you. Ursula von der Leyen went to Kyiv back in April this month, April 8th, back on April 8th, to assure Zelensky that they would process his application in a matter of weeks. Well, it's been 2 weeks, so probably Ukraine is going to join the European Union. Well, we'll see. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's. I believe that they have to have 100% vote in the European Union to become a member of the European Union, just like NATO, just like the United Nations. But I could be wrong. We'll see how long it takes. But there's also this question of should they be allowed to join NATO now? Now, no nation at war with a non-NATO country has ever joined NATO during that war. And so the question is, you know, how is this going to play out? What's going to happen? And, oh, and yeah, it does say here in the article, it requires unanimous agreement of NATO's 30 member states and the ratification of NATO's governing treaty. So back in 2008, Ukraine tried to get into NATO, and Germany and France blocked them, which is interesting. And they blocked them specifically. They came right out and said they didn't want to provoke. Germany, of course, at that time was negotiating to buy massive amounts of fossil fuels from Russia. Gerhard Schroeder, who was the head of Germany, I don't think he was in 2008. I think he was a little earlier than that. I think he was through the 90s. But he's now being paid $1 million a year, excuse me. He's being paid $1 million a year by Russia, by the Russian Federation, as you know, a member of the board or something like that of one of the big Russian oil companies. He's become a pariah, by the way, inside Germany, but he's still taking his $1 million a year. And no doubt, he notes in this, Ivo Dodler notes in this piece in The Atlantic, no doubt Putin would threaten military and political consequences. But what is he going to do? I mean, he's already invaded the country, Ukraine. He's already, you know, murdered tens of thousands of civilians. His troops have already raped thousands of women and children. What more can they're bombing apartment buildings? What more can they do? I guess they could do more of the same. But I am increasingly thinking that NATO needs to be having a conversation about this. I realize that Anthony Blinken and Lloyd, our defense secretary, Lloyd Austin, going off to Ukraine is almost certainly being viewed as a provocation by Russia. Lloyd Austin saying that our goal is to weaken Russia definitely will be seen as a provocation by Russia. Are we to the point where we just don't care? Where we're willing to take the chance, where we're willing basically to call Russia's bluff. I'm not here to offer you any easy answers on any of this stuff. These are the issues that are being struggled with at the State Department and the Pentagon right now in the European Union and in NATO, in the halls of NATO, and by all of the 30 NATO members, all of these nations. They're all struggling with this. What do we do with it? So let me just toss that out for you. My opinion is that, broadly speaking, We should not allow ourselves to be intimidated by Russia's attacks on Ukraine or their threats. I think you do what's right. But I realize a lot of people are really afraid, oh my God, this is going to start a nuclear war, and that's a real legitimate fear. I still remember duck and cover. So what do we do? Number one. Number two, I don't know if you caught over the weekend, a couple of other things here that I wanted to share with you. I don't know if you caught over the weekend the Alexey Navalny special on CNN. It ran 2 hours. And I'm sure they're going to repeat it. This is they did this with HBO, so it probably lives over on HBO. I haven't looked, but you know, we recorded it yesterday, but we couldn't, thinking, you know, we'll watch a little bit of this and then come back to it because I thought I knew the Navalny story. And then in the second hour, when they get into this whole thing where he and this guy in like Belgium, I think it was, who's just like a numbers freak. I mean, I mean that in the positive way. You know, he describes himself as kind of an aspie. He figures out who the assassination team was, and there's this team of 20 people that Putin is paid with 3 professional assassins and 17 people as their support network who followed Navalny around for years from the time he first declared his candidacy to run against Putin and ultimately tried to murder him. And they get one of these guys on the phone, and I'm going to stop right there, if you know, because if you haven't seen it, you need to watch this thing. It's amazing. So I just wanted to toss that out, and also the Macron victory. Macron is sort of the, you know, he's not literally the last neoliberal standing in Europe, but he's the last guy who, when he came to power 5 years ago, he was still running as fast as he could down that neoliberal path. Tax cuts for the rich. In fact, they call him the president of the rich. This is why you keep hearing this phrase in France that people are saying, well, it's a choice between cholera or the plague, right? And Macron being the cholera. He did the tax cuts for the rich. He's doubling down on a whole series of neoliberal policies. He cut back on social welfare programs. He cut back on education funding. He cut back. I mean, there's a whole long list of things that Macron did that were just like right out of, excuse me, I don't know why I have the hiccups today, that were right out of the neoliberal playbook. And I'm wondering how this is going to change France, because I think he got a hell of a scare with Marine Le Pen, even though she only got a little over 40% of the vote. I think that he got a hell of a scare. And in the last 6 months, he has been changing his tune. He's been talking about, okay, we will raise wages, and we will support labor unions, and we will, basically abandoning neoliberalism, as Joe Biden did when he became president a year and a half ago. It appears to me that we are seeing the death of neoliberalism happening all around the world. And I see that as a good thing, as broadly a good thing. So, a couple of things that I wanted to put on your radar screen. We can talk about those. I also want to get into this question of, is it possible to turn the elections around? In fact, is it even strategic and smart to wait until after the summer for these big actions that Elizabeth Warren is talking about? I'll fill you in on that on the other side of this break.